All right. So we're welcome back to virtual Black Hat 2021. Yeah, it's virtual. I'm still in the TARDIS here, so I'm not actually there. But you're with Security Weekly. We are. I saw this. I saw this interview come up, and I couldn't resist it because of the topic and the subject matter. So we're going to have Charles Givre, who is the CEO of DataDistillr, on. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I saw this topic and I got pretty interested in it. I had read Lee Penn and Jagdish's paper about schema-free SQL, and I saw that was sort of your area of interest. Could you maybe tell the people a little bit about what that means?
Yeah. So the basic premise. So if you think about tools like Splunk or Elasticsearch or a lot of other tools like that, you have to define the schema of your data. In other words, you have to know what you're looking at before you can actually query or analyze it. With schema-free tools like Drill, you can basically point your query engine at arbitrary data, and query it without knowing what's there. So it radically accelerates the process because you don't have to involve a data engineer in order to look at all kinds of data. So it's really cool. With that said, schema-free querying is quite complicated and how it works, and there is some knowledge that you have to have. It's not magic, but in general, I would say it works really well when once you kind of understand how it works.
I mean, this is the idea. This is I call this well, I usually call it the Majel Barrett model, but it's the Star Trek computer, right? So now I can say, find Nerf herder, and instead of me having to know that that's a line and a script from a certain movie, this kind of searching means that you can piece together this SQL query out of what I ask for, rather than me having to know that is not the title of a movie, but that is rather something in a script. Is that fair?
Yes, kind of. So it's usually more like you give it an arbitrary data file, and what the schema-free tools will do is they'll figure out what are the columns and rows of that data set without you having to define that. So like if you have a PCAP file, for instance, like the tool that I'm talking about, say, okay, the first 8 bytes of this are the MAC address and the IP header, or whatever whatever the spec actually is, and things like that. Or you don't have to, if you have a JSON file or an XML file, you don't have to tell it what that schema is in advance. You can just point at it as if it was in a database and already pre-populated.
So it basically is it on the fly, or does it establish this consistently for this data every time, or is it some it's assembled as it goes along?
It actually does it. So it kind of depends on the data source, but basically it does it on the fly.
Yeah, I mean that was what I got from reading this paper about it, was that they were using a sort of weighting approach to figure out how to actually query this, and that leads you to essentially the ability then to look at massive data sets where you don't have a clear view of what's there, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And what it does, like from my experience, I mean, I was a product owner at JP Morgan in the cybersecurity group, and whenever we would get where it really shines is when you would get new data, you can just start working without having to involve like a data engineering team to like map out the schemas and do all that sort of stuff. It's really just it makes it so that regular user can start accessing all sorts of data without having to involve like engineering teams. That's where I think
Yeah, I mean, I kind of came out of the realm of like hierarchical databases and things that were very rigid. And even when they switched over to relational databases and so forth, it was still pretty rigid to write SQL queries for your applications. So I guess where this goes next is into big data and the ability to query large sort of free-form data sets that are out there. And that led me to reading about Apache Drill. So could you tell us a little bit about what Apache Drill is?
Sure. So Drill is one of several query engines that was inspired by the Google Dremel paper, which was published in 2010. Basically, Drill is a schema-free SQL engine for what they describe as self-describing data sets. So the premise there is that you connect Drill to virtually any data set, and then you can query it using SQL. It's distributed, so it's scalable, and it in my view, is one of the most interesting tools out there for people who work with data, just because it can connect to all kinds of data sources. You can query them, you can join them, and it radically changes the analytic experience because you as the user can stop worrying about like where your data is coming from. You can just focus on what is the actual problem you're trying to solve. And so that's kind of in a nutshell. I know. So I'm co-author of the O'Reilly book about Drill, and I've contributed a decent amount of code to it, but it really can do like all sorts of amazing things with data. And in my view, it's a really exciting product. So, and it's not very well known. So I'm trying to kind of get the word out about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, I had not seen it. I don't work with that. I'd heard of Dremel, and I was very interested in this when I always try to start with the academics. So when I saw the topic of your talk, I went back to the the academic papers, and then I was like, wow, what else is out there with this? And I thought it was really interesting. Do you think that drill and things like that lead to sort of a world where you can just literally say what all do the numbers THX 1138 have, and we can go out on the web and start pulling down a massive number of queries that are going to pull together all possible occurrences of things like that?
It could. Where I see Drill playing a good role, and this is I mean I'm not here like this is kind of what my startup is about also, is it makes it such that a user without a lot of technical skill can access data that they otherwise would not be able to.
Right.
It's not a search engine in the sense of like a Google or Elasticsearch like that, but it can connect to things like that. So and translate that into columns and rows so that you can do automated analysis, you can do machine learning, you can do those things, and it can really enable users to just access these different data sources and join them and do all sorts of other interesting things.
Yeah.
I had this use case.
Can that be used then to kind of build yourself a database schema, if you will, out of the world, so you can pull together all these on the fly joins and have all these different tables put together so you can do research. Is that fair? Yeah,
absolutely. What's also neat about Drill is that it's quite easy to extend. And so I've written a lot of, and other people have as well, of functions that do, data cleanup, data enrichment, all these kinds of things. And what that does is that can facilitate some really awesome analysis. But what's really great is because it abstracts the data, it also it makes these repeatable. So like if I write this query that does something really interesting with a PCAP file, I can apply that same analytic to any other PCAP file that I can read, and or any log file or whatever the case may be. It makes the analytic process a lot better.
That's really, it's a really interesting tool, and I hadn't read that much about it, and I spent some time today reading about it, and I found it to be pretty exciting. I think it's a big step forward in the ability to collect data, to analyze data, and to pull resources together that are maybe not currently all together already in some kind of schema. I thought that was pretty interesting. So you built a company called DataDistillr. So you want to tell me a little bit about that and what that does?
Yeah, sure. So so DataDistillr is what we're trying to do is we're using Drill as what I call a data abstraction layer. So the basic premise is there now. while Drill is really powerful, it does require, when you start doing things like using SQL on file systems, there is some nuance that you have to have, and so what our tool does, first off, we have a hosted environment where a user can just log in and they get access to like a hosted instance of Drill. We have collaboration tools that enable people to share data and collaborate effectively, but our goal is to make all data easy to use and query, and that's kind of the basic principle. So a user can log in, they can connect up their data sources and securely, I might add, and they can query their data and work with it and share it with colleagues and even create their own APIs from data.
So eventually, I guess your goal might be that a lot of at least people that are willing to share data would contribute all this, and you're going to have this sort of large repository of a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, as a security professional, I definitely get the challenges of securing data, that not everybody wants to share all their data. So there are access controls around things like that. But basically, what we've kind of envisioned is especially within an enterprise, you may have one group that's working on some data, but then they want to share that with other teams or within the confines of their organization. So our tool's set up to facilitate that quite easily. What I saw at places I've worked is just the tools in this area in this regard are so lacking that people can't share their data. So then they end up doing all sorts of things like creating share drives and emailing stuff to people, and that just creates all kinds of other problems.
Yeah, I mean that's a traditional problem, I think, among. I agree with you about the security side of it, but I mean, I think for essentially open source data, there's a lot of interest in sharing information, especially files and things like that.
Yeah.
I always see people asking questions about how could I get this or how can I get more information about that. So hopefully people would be willing to contribute to that. I mean, not everybody will, obviously.
Yeah. I hope so. I'd also add is one of the really neat things that Drill can do is you can query APIs directly. And what I think is really slick, and and using this feature is there's a lot of data that's out there that is accessible via public APIs. Like there's the CVE database. There's for instance, I was kind of playing with that. There's there's so much reference data that's available. And what's really cool is when you use Drill's API query ability, you now can integrate that into your own analytic projects really simply. And I know also a lot of corporations have their own internal APIs. So just being able to rapidly query APIs without having to define schemata, without like destroying corporate API, corporate access controls it's really such a pleasure to work with.
And I guess that abstraction layer then lets you have the opportunity to sort of bypass the issue of compatibility across all those different schema, right? I mean, since you can just sort of link to those APIs and pull data down.
That's definitely the case. I'm sorry, the last bit of what you said came across a little garbled. I didn't hear that.
Oh, I was saying that the abstraction sort of basically gives you the ability to avoid. Again, this is basically what they were talking about in schema-free SQL, which was I have to understand that backend API before I can write a query that joins that to this other backend API that I want to query at the same time. So the abstraction is going to let me get around that problem, right?
Yeah, it lets you get around that to some degree. Now, with APIs, because they're communicating over the HTTP, there are some kind of tricks that you have to know. And again, this is what our tool helps people navigate. But like, for example, let's say you have an API that requires you to send a parameter down that filters it. So what our tool does, what Drill does is you have to that parameter, and then it will actually, when you have a where clause, it will push that parameter into the where clause so that the queries are more efficient. But setting that, the initial setup for that is something that requires a little knowledge. That's something that our tool does. But once you know that, it's a one-time thing versus every time you have someone querying that, they have to learn that. So it makes it a lot easier.
What do you think the biggest challenge for somebody trying to get into using your tool would be, assuming they have basic database knowledge? Because I think just jumping into this blind might be a little wild, but.
So the biggest challenge I think is right now. Our tool requires a knowledge of SQL. As it matures, our UI is going to get better and smarter, and the user will need to know less and less SQL.
Well, Yeah, I mean, I think that's always been a limitation to database. It was why we had data engineers and things like that, because even programmers who were regularly writing code. I mean, I remember when I first started doing SQL, queries for commercial code. We weren't even allowed to write SQL queries because the data people were like, "No, we have to write them. You send in your requests, and we'll put them together because you'll just screw it up."
Yeah.
I didn't always agree with that, but I'm kind of like that. But I mean, so this tool would have facilitated something like that as well, right? Because I could then use your tool in my code and query all these databases that I needed to query in a more abstract way than I would have had to do back when I was doing it, which meant I had to write an SQL query and a join.
Yeah. One of the things that DataDistillr is going to do is so first off, we track kind of the compute cost of queries. And so one of our missions is, as our UX person says, is to help people verb better. So our tool is going to do things like when people write, let's just say suboptimal queries, we're going to kind of warn them or steer them in the right direction, or basically prevent disasters, with the goal being to teach people how to do their analysis better.
That's really cool. I mean, I'm very excited about the tool. I think it's going to facilitate a lot of people's needs. It sounds very interesting to me. And if anybody out there is interested in checking out this, there's links in the wiki on securityweekly.com. Thank you, Charles, for joining us for this brief interview from virtual. I know you're not virtually black hatting, but we're virtually black hatting, so you're actually there. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, good luck with your company. I hope to see it around all over the place soon.
Thank you. Take care.
Yeah, you too. Have a good day.